She didn't look at me the way I expected her to. Most people, when they figure out what I do for a living, they get this expression. Not mean, exactly. Just a slight recalibration. A quiet adjustment of expectations. I'm a roofer, have been for 17 years. I drive a '09 Ford F-150 that needs a new muffler. I wear the same 3 flannels in rotation from October to April, and my hands look like I've been shaking hands with gravel my whole life. Which, more or less, I have. But Miriam Caldwell-Hurst didn't do any of that. She looked at me the way you look at someone you've been trying to remember the name of. Like she already knew something about me that I hadn't told her yet. I should back up. My daughter's name is Cora. She's 8 years old, and she is, without any exaggeration whatsoever, the only reason I get out of bed on the mornings that feel like they're made of wet concrete. Her mother, Diane, left when Cora was 3. Not dramatically. Not with a fight or a slammed door or anything I could point to and say, "There, that's where it broke." She just quietly decided that the life she'd built with me wasn't the life she wanted, and she went to find the one she did. She's in Vancouver now. Sends cards at Christmas. Cora doesn't talk about her much, and I've learned not to push. It's been just the 2 of us, me and Cora, for 5 years now. We live in a rented semi-detached on Elm Ridge Road in Hamilton, Ontario. It's not a pretty house. The gutters need replacing, which is embarrassing, given my profession, and the backyard is mostly mud from May to September because Cora decided last spring to try and dig a pond for the frogs she was convinced lived under the back fence. They didn't. She's still hoping. I drop her at school every morning at 8:15. I pick her up at 3:30, unless I'm on a job, in which case Mrs. Papadopoulos from next door walks her home and feeds her crackers and lets her watch the cooking channel until I get back. Cora loves Mrs. Papadopoulos. She's also convinced Mrs. Papadopoulos is secretly a spy, which I have not discouraged because it makes pickup feel like an adventure. My life was small. I knew it was small. I wasn't ashamed of it. Small doesn't mean bad. Small can mean held together carefully, which is what ours was. And then a Thursday in October changed everything. And it didn't happen the way you'd think. It started with a broken skylight. The call came in from a property management company on a Wednesday afternoon. Emergency repair, residential, Ancaster neighborhood, which meant money, because Ancaster is where people live when they've stopped worrying about money. I drove out the next morning, tarps in the truck bed, coffee in the cup holder. The radio on the country station Cora has decided is the only acceptable choice because one of the songs has a dog in it. The house was, well, it was the kind of house that makes you recalibrate your sense of scale. Not a mansion, exactly, but a house that has grounds, a winding driveway lined with old maples, a detached garage that was larger than my entire first apartment. I parked where the property manager's instructions said to park, got out, and started unloading. 50. A woman came around the side of the house before I'd finished pulling out the extension ladder. I thought she was the housekeeper. I'm not proud of that assumption. She was wearing jeans and a gray Henley, hair pulled back, no makeup that I could see. She looked like someone who'd just come in from a run, or from pulling weeds, or from doing something ordinary with her hands. She said, "You're the roofer." I said, "That's me, Marcus." I put out my hand. She shook it without hesitation. "Miriam, it's my skylight. Can I show you?" That was the first thing I noticed about her. No preamble, no hovering or apologizing or asking if I wanted coffee before she'd let me start. Just, "Here is the problem. Here is me. Let's go look at it." The skylight was in the studio at the back of the house. She explained on the way that she'd had it installed 3 years ago, and the flashing had never quite been right, and that last week's rain had finally come through into the room below. The studio turned out to be where she worked, and it was where I found out who she actually was, because the walls were covered in it. Press clippings, design mock-ups, a whiteboard with numbers written in 4 different colors of marker, a framed magazine cover that had her face on it above the words, "The Quiet Billionaire Who's Reshaping Canadian Real Estate." I tried not to stare. She caught me not staring and said, "The skylight is up through here," which is how we both got through the next 30 seconds without it being awkward. I did the assessment. The flashing had lifted on the north edge. Common problem, installer hadn't sealed it correctly the first time. Cold winters do the rest. I told her what it would take, what it would cost, and approximately how long. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than you'd think. Most clients interrupt. She just listened, and then she said, "When can you start?" I came back Friday with my guy Terrence. We were on the roof by 9. At around 11, I heard a car pull into the driveway. A few minutes later, I heard a door, and then small footsteps on the gravel, and then a voice say very distinctly, "Mom, there's a man on your roof." I looked down. A kid, maybe 7 or 8, dark hair, serious expression, standing in the driveway with a backpack still on his shoulders, looking up at me with the frank, unsentimental gaze that only children and very old people can manage. Not scared, not excited, just evaluating. I raised my hand. "Morning." He raised his hand back, exact same gesture, "Morning." Miriam came out behind him, hand on his shoulder, and said to me, "This is my son, Elliot. He gets half days on Fridays." Elliot didn't say anything else. He just kept looking at me with that expression, like he was solving a problem that had a lot of steps. We finished the primary repair by 2. I told Miriam I'd need to come back the following week to seal the perimeter properly, once the temperature dropped a bit overnight. She said fine. I packed up. Elliot was sitting on the back porch steps when I came around with the ladder, doing something with a piece of string. One of those cat's cradle patterns that kids get obsessed with for exactly 1 week and then abandon forever. I stopped. I don't know why I stopped. I had a truck to load and a 4:30 pickup to make. He looked up. I said, "Which elm knot? My daughter taught me that one." He looked at the string, then back at me. "She's older than me." "Ain't you?" 7.5. He considered this. "What's her name?" "Cora." He looked at the string again. "Cora is a good name." I said, "Yeah, I think so too." He said, "Mine's Elliot, but I also answer to Eli if someone forgets." Good system. He almost smiled, not quite, but almost. I finished loading the truck. On my way out, Miriam was at the front door, and she said thank you in the way that meant it. Not the automatic way, not the way people say it as they're already closing the door. She was looking at me with that expression again, the one I didn't know how to read yet. I drove home, made Cora pasta with butter and parmesan, which she has decided is called fancy noodles, and which she requires at least twice a week. She told me about her day. I told her mine. We watched half a nature documentary about migratory birds until she fell asleep on the couch, and I carried her to bed. I thought about that kid, Elliot, and the cat's cradle for longer than made sense. I came back the following Wednesday to finish the sealant work. Elliot was home from school, a teacher's day, apparently, and he was in the backyard when I got up on the roof. He'd set up what appeared to be an entire command center on the patio table, a notebook, several pencils, a pair of small binoculars, and a laminated sheet that I was too far away to read. When I looked down at one point, he had the binoculars trained on me. I said, "You know binoculars work both ways." He lowered them. "I know, I was documenting." "Documenting what?" "How you move on the roof. You have a system. Most people don't have a system. You do the same movements in the same order, he looked at his notebook, like a sequence." I didn't know what to say to that. It was the most accurate description of experienced roofing I'd ever heard, and it came from a 7-year-old with a laminated sheet. "You're very observant," I said. He looked at this as a statement of fact, not a compliment, I know. Miriam appeared at the back door around noon with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed me mine when I came down for a break with a directness that I was starting to recognize as just her. The way she operated, she didn't perform warmth, she just was or wasn't, and when she was, it felt completely real. She asked how long I'd been doing this. I told her, 17 years, started at 22, trained under my uncle who'd come over from Portugal and had the best flat roof technique I'd ever seen. She asked if I'd always worked in Hamilton. "Mostly," I said. "A few jobs in Burlington, one big commercial project in Brantford a few years back." She said, "Do you like it?" People don't usually ask that. They ask how long, how much, how soon, not whether I like it. I said, "Yeah, I do. There's something, you're dealing with the actual problem. You can see it, fix it, stand back and know it's done. Not a lot of jobs are like that." She looked at me for a moment, then she said, "No, they're not." Elliot came over and stood between us. He looked at his mother, then at me, then back at his mother. Then he said very seriously, "Marcus's daughter is named Cora. She's 8. She knows a knot." Miriam blinked. Then she looked at me. "You told him about your daughter?" "Briefly." Elliot said. I liked the way he said her name. There was a silence. I looked at the mug in my hands. Miriam looked at Elliot. Elliot had already turned back to his command center, apparently satisfied with the information he'd conveyed. I finished the job that afternoon, signed off on the repair, gave Miriam the invoice, shook her hand. She held it a half-second longer than the previous time. I didn't think about what that meant, or I thought about it the whole drive home and decided not to think about it. One of those two things. 3 weeks went by. Then she called. Not the property management company, her. Directly, which meant she'd kept my card from the invoice. She said there was a flashing issue on the west chimney that she'd noticed, and she didn't want to go through the management company again because they added a surcharge and she didn't see the point. Could I come have a look? I could come have a look. Elliot was at school that time. It was just the two of us on the property for the first time, and something in the air was different. Not uncomfortable, the opposite. Like we'd already moved past the part where you perform small talk and arrived at something easier. She made coffee, real coffee, not the button machine kind, and we sat at the kitchen island for 20 minutes before I even went to look at the chimney, and we talked about Hamilton and what it had been like there in the 90s and what it was like now, and about Cora and about Elliot, and about the fact that she'd been on her own with him for 4 years. His father, she said, was not a bad man. He was just someone who needed a different kind of life than the one we had. We figured that out too late to save the marriage, but early enough to still be decent to each other. She said it without bitterness, which is a harder thing than it sounds. I said something similar about Diane. The words came out more easily than I expected. She said, it changes you, doing it alone, not in a bad way necessarily, but it changes what you need from another person. What do you need? I asked, and then immediately felt like I'd said too much. But she didn't flinch. She thought about it. She said, someone who just is what they say they are, all the way through. I looked at my coffee. She looked at me. She said, you should see the chimney. I did. The flashing was actually fine. A small piece of debris had lodged against it and created the impression of a gap. 15 minutes, problem solved. I told her she didn't owe me anything for the call. She said, stay for lunch. I did. 150. This is the part of the story I find hardest to explain because nothing dramatic happened for the next 2 months. We just kept talking. She texted a question about her flat garage roof. I answered. She mentioned Elliot had started a new obsession with weather patterns. I mentioned Cora had started an obsession with the color orange and now owned 7 orange things. She sent back a photo of Elliot's weather chart, which was extraordinarily detailed for a 7-year-old. I sent back a photo of Cora's 7 orange objects arranged in a line on her bedroom floor, including 1 small orange traffic pylon she'd found in a ditch, which she referred to as Clementine. We met for coffee once, just the two of us, at a cafe on James Street North in the city, and I was nervous in a way I hadn't been nervous about anything interpersonal since my early 20s. Not because she was wealthy, because I'd started caring what she thought of me, and that's always the more terrifying thing. She was already there when I arrived, which I'd half expected. She ordered a black coffee and a piece of lemon loaf, and she cut the lemon loaf precisely in half with her fork and pushed one half toward me without asking, and I don't know why, but that tiny gesture, that unconscious sharing, hit me somewhere I wasn't ready for. We talked for almost 3 hours. When I looked at my phone and realized I had 40 minutes before I needed to be at Cora's school, I said it before I could think twice. I'd like to do this again. She said, I'd like that too. No game, just yes. I picked up Cora. She looked at me with that particular 8-year-old radar that detects when something is different. She said, you look weird. I said, thank you. She said, it's not a bad weird. I need to tell you about the night it nearly went wrong. There was an event in early December, a fundraiser, one of those black tie things at a hotel ballroom in downtown Hamilton for a children's hospital foundation that Miriam's company had been supporting for years. She mentioned it to me a few weeks before. She said, carefully, that she had to go, that she always went, that it was important to her, and then she said, less carefully, I would like it if you were there. I said I'd go. I borrowed a suit from my friend Devon, who is larger than me in the shoulders, in a way that the tailor at Moore's helped me partially address. I arranged for Mrs. Papadopoulos to have Cora for the night. I drove to the hotel in my '09 Ford, which felt briefly embarrassing and then felt like mine, which is the better feeling. The event was exactly what you'd expect. Rounds of tables with white linens, a silent auction along one wall, people in expensive dresses talking about things I had no reference for. I knew Miriam would be busy. It was her table, her world, her obligation. I knew I'd be standing on the edge of things I didn't belong to. What I didn't expect was the man. His name, I later learned, was Graham Fairfax. He was the kind of man that rooms like this produce. Tall, easy in a suit, the sort of confident that doesn't come from anything he's ever actually worked for. He'd known Miriam for years through the real estate world. He'd been, according to the murmured observation of someone at my elbow I didn't know, interested in Miriam for most of those years. I watched him cross the room toward her. I watched her face when she saw him, polite, contained, a very particular kind of patient. I watched him say something that made the people nearby laugh and made her almost smile, in the way you almost smile when someone says something you've heard before. And I almost left. I'm not going to dress that up. I thought, I am a roofer from Elm Ridge Road who borrowed a suit. This is not my world. She deserves someone who fits in it. Those thoughts, in that order, and I put down my drink and I actually started moving toward the exit. And then my phone buzzed. It was a photo from Mrs. Papadopoulos. Cora, in her pajamas, sitting at Mrs. P's kitchen table with a piece of paper in front of her. She'd drawn something. The photo was slightly blurry, the way Mrs. P's photos always were, but I could make it out. It was two figures on a roof, a big one and a small one beside it, stars above them. Below in orange crayon, of course orange, Cora had written, "My dad shows me stuff." I stood in that hotel ballroom for a long moment. Then I went back. I found Miriam near the silent auction table, alone for a moment while Graham had been absorbed into a group nearby. I came up beside her. I didn't say anything clever. I didn't have a speech. I said I almost left. She turned to look at me. I said, I thought I didn't belong here. I still might not belong here, but I didn't want to go without telling you that what's happened between us, however small it is or isn't, it matters to me, and I'm not the kind of man who walks away from things that matter to him. So, she looked at me for a long time. Then she said, my son asked about you last week. I said, he did? He said, and I'm quoting exactly, Mum, does Marcus know what kind of hawk that was on the chimney? Because I think it might be a Cooper's hawk, and he was on the chimney for a long time, and I need to document it. I laughed. I couldn't help it. She said, and then he said, also, I think you should invite him to dinner. I said, smart kid. She said, he's always right about people. I've learned to trust his radar. She looked at me, and in her eyes I could see something resolving, something that had been held in careful suspension, finally coming to rest. She said, stay. One word. I stayed. The dinner, when it happened, was a Thursday in January. Terrence covered my afternoon job. I brought a bottle of Ontario Riesling that the woman at the wine shop had promised was the right thing to bring, and a small carved wooden hawk I'd found at a shop on Ottawa Street. I'd painted the tail with a slightly reddish stripe, because I'd looked it up, and yes, it had been a Cooper's hawk. Elliot opened the front door before I could knock. He looked at the hawk in my hand. He looked at me. He said, you found out what kind it was. I did. He took the hawk very carefully with both hands, examined it, turned it over, looked at the tail stripe. He said, this is accurate. I said, I tried. He said, come in. He stepped back and pulled the door wide open, and that gesture, a 7-year-old kid pulling a door open with both hands, the deliberate ceremony of it, is something I will carry for the rest of my life. We had roasted chicken and roasted potatoes, and a salad that Elliot had helped make, which he informed me contained 3 different lettuces, but I picked out the one I didn't like. Miriam had lit candles, not in an overdone way. Just, it was a nicer table than it needed to be, which is a way of saying someone had thought about it. Halfway through dinner, Elliot looked at me and said, my mum says she's going to wait until she finds the right person. The table got quiet. He looked at Miriam. He looked at me, the same evaluating expression I'd seen on the driveway in October from a kid looking up at a stranger on a roof. Except this time there was no uncertainty in it. he said. I think it's you. Miriam set down her fork. I set down mine. Elliot picked his back up and resumed eating, apparently finished with the matter, because in his mind he'd stated a fact, and facts don't require follow-up. Miriam looked at me, her eyes were bright, not crying, just full. I said quietly, just to her, he's right about people. She pressed her lips together, and then she smiled, a real one, not the polite ones from the ballroom, not the careful ones from the early weeks. This one was just hers. Unguarded and warm, and completely real. Under the table, I felt a small hand reach over and give my wrist one firm pat. The way you pat something you've decided belongs to you. And 50, Elliot. He was already talking about the hawk again, about whether Cooper's hawks were more common in southern Ontario than he'd thought, about whether he should keep a log, about whether Cora would want to see his weather chart. I looked at Miriam across the table. She looked back. And that was it. Not the fireworks version, not the grand gesture, the grand speech, the dramatic declaration. Just a table with candles and a roasted chicken and a kid who knew something before the adults did, and a woman with bright eyes, and a man who'd almost walked away from the best thing that had ever walked toward him. I'd spent 5 years making sure everything was held together carefully. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't holding it alone. I think about Elliot a lot. Not just because of what he said at that dinner table, though that moment lives in me the way certain moments do, the ones that rearrange something quietly and permanently. I think about him because of what he saw, and when he saw it, and the fact that he was 7 years old and hadn't learned yet to talk himself out of what he knew. There's something in that worth sitting with. I spent a long time believing that the life I had, small, careful, held together with early mornings and borrowed suits and pasta with butter twice a week, was something to apologize for. Not out loud. I wouldn't have said that. But underneath, in the way I'd start to speak and then recalibrate, in the way I parked my truck around the corner the first time I went to Ancaster, before I thought better of it and pulled right up the driveway where I was supposed to be. We carry those quiet embarrassments like ballast, and half the time we don't even notice how much they're weighing us down. What I understand now, what this whole thing, this improbable, ordinary, completely unplanned thing, taught me, is that the life you've built honestly has a texture that shortcuts don't. People feel it, even when they can't name it. Miriam felt it. Elliot felt it before anyone. The kid who documented my movements on the roof because I had a system, because I did the same thing in the same order every time, he saw something in that worth recording. Consistency, care. The way you show up to a job and you do it right because that's the kind of person you are, not because someone's watching. That's not a small thing. It's actually the whole thing. I nearly walked out of that hotel ballroom. I want to be honest about that because I think a lot of people would have, and I almost did. The voice that says you don't belong here is loud and it's fast and it sounds a lot like reason. What got me back wasn't courage. Exactly. It was a blurry photo of my daughter in her pajamas, and a drawing of 2 figures on a roof, and the word Dad written in orange crayon. Cora, who has never once in her 8 years on this earth thought I was less than enough. She taught me that too, without knowing she was teaching me anything. I think the things we carry through the hard years, the integrity to do good work when it would be easier not to, the willingness to think clearly about what's actually true instead of what we wish were true, the stubbornness to stay when everything in you wants to retreat, those things accumulate. They don't disappear. They become the texture of you. And the right people, when they find you, can feel them. Elliot felt them. And he grabbed my wrist at a dinner table in January and patted it once, the way you pat something you've decided belongs to you. I don't take that lightly. I don't think I ever will. Who is the person in your life who saw you clearly before you could fully see yourself? And did you ever tell them what it meant?